Welcome, folks, to Chaps Many Cultures, another episode here on a beautiful Thursday, episode 179. Merry-go-rounds, roller coasters, pendulums, swings and roundabouts. There's lots of metaphors that can describe this wonderful life of expathood. I don't even know whether that's a word. Maybe it's a conjunction. Especially when we're working with a German, there's lots of conjunctions, lots of mix-ups, lots of back and forths. Let's talk about that life with somebody who has lived it larger than pretty much a lot of people on the face of the planet, and we'll get some great insights into what drives her and her work to support other people that do it as well. Stick around, I promise.
Hey, Mike.
We are back. The world's #1 live stream show anywhere in the world of the business of culture and the culture of business. How are you today, pal? Sitting in a little bit of, is it nighttime where you are?
Yeah, it appears so, because we might be the #1 show, but our lighting team apparently hasn't woken up yet. I don't know what's going on. The lighting situation is a little bit of a, oh, here we go. Here, let's shine on this oily noggin here a little bit. No, this ain't gonna work. So no, it doesn't matter how well illuminated I am, because you obviously sit in the bright lights of the main studio, whereas I am relegated to some minor back rooms of our studio complex. And that's life for me. I'm happy to play that role. I'm even happy to play the be the what's that word, the object of your anti-German jokes. Just lay it on me. That's all right.
I wasn't anti-German. I don't think I was anti-German. I'm pro-German. I'm pro-German. I'm pro-Bavarian. I'm pro-Bavarian. Well, yes, folks,
that's very important.
It is another episode, and yes, we have been kind of doing a little bit of a theme of expats, talking about, being in different parts of the world and traveling around, and also living around the world as well, right? And,
right.
It's been a bit of a theme this week, and of course, you're going to get sick of us talking about it, so we want to bring on some guests that actually have some real kudos, some real, you call it street cred? I'm trying to throw around all kinds of metaphors today, but let's not
just say she knows what she's talking about. How about that?
That's right. That's right. Which is the opposite of what we do. So please welcome to the Two Chaps Tower of wonderful insights into expat life, Sundae Schneider-Bean.
Welcome.
That goes wild. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. What an introduction.
We haven't got much. We haven't got much to put our to introduce ourselves. So we need some star power. And so, welcome with, I got to say, one of the best microphones that has been featured on the Two Chaps Many Cultures.
Yeah, that is impressive. I have to say that
it's a roadcaster. It's so pretty. Yeah,
it is pretty. And of course, we're going to get to this. You do have a podcast, a wonderful podcast, which has supported the lives and probably, the difficult parts of the expat life for many people around the world, that little kind of, whatever resources people use. And podcasts is one of those things you can listen to anywhere, and you've got one, and we'll get to that point. But tell us, where are you joining us from on this wonderful day?
I'm calling in from Pretoria, South Africa. So it is the beginning of fall here, actually, instead of spring, as you're finding in Europe. But don't want to make you jealous. It's still really nice and warm here.
Yeah, well, that's right. We were a bit reversed. So, and of course, they play all the beautiful sports down in South Africa, the cricket and rugby and football. We're talking real football here, aren't we, Christian? Okay, got to get it right.
Yes.
And wonderful. So why South Africa? You don't sound like you're South African. by the way.
No, I am not South African, even
You
though
look very Moorish.
I've learned some words like robot and techies and baki and those sort of things since being here. But I'm originally from Williston, North Dakota, born and raised. Did not grow up with any models of living a global life, but ended up backpacking around Southeast Asia in the late 90s. Met a Swiss guy in Vietnam, ended up getting married and living in Switzerland for over a decade, had 2 kids, moved to West Africa and South Africa in 2016.
What was that? I want to pick up on that North Dakota part for somebody.
I knew he was going to do that. I knew you.
Yeah. Don't you know I had to do it? So, as someone who's lived in Minnesota and close to the North Dakota state line, I know how brutally desperate the winter months can be there. So, what was the solitude and the meat locker temperatures of North Dakota one of the reasons that got you on your global trip, or what brought that bug? What took you out of that monocultural nest?
Well, the meat locker cold is such a well-chosen description. Honestly, it had nothing to do with the weather. I just knew when I was a little kid that there was a lot more diversity out there, and there was more to what was going on in my community, and I wanted to see the world. I just had this sense really, really early on that I didn't really think in national boundaries. I thought more like, this is our planet and I want to see it. And I was really driven by that. I ended up going to university in Minneapolis in Minnesota for a short time, and then ended up going to finishing university in Spain, and then traveling throughout Western Europe and Southeast Asia. So it was just a drive that I felt. But I did have to say, from the cold perspective, we had a choice between Ulaanbaatar and Ouagadougou. And it was winter in Switzerland when we had to decide. And I remember just writing my husband and going, no, no, not
Mongolia. Not Mongolia. No,
yeah, we're going to go to Ouagadougou instead. Like, I will wear bug spray if there's malaria, but do not make me go in the cold.
Nice. Did your parents have anything to do with that at all? Or was this something you discovered for yourself, that this is a globe and there's more than this life here in North Dakota? Or did your parents and family have nothing to do with that?
I think it really freaked my parents out, to be honest, that my, when I told them I was going to study abroad, that already felt like a big deal, right?
Yeah.
But when I told them I was going to backpack throughout Southeast Asia, they really got nervous. But by that time I was 21 and independent, and they couldn't really do anything about it. So they really had to do a lot of grappling with that, especially places like Vietnam, where their only association was with the Vietnam War, and not really having traveled there, it felt very foreign. I do think that they had something to do with it because they've raised me to be really independent. And my mom said she did too good of a job.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think wouldn't you agree, if we all work with families that do this, these are quite often unusual stories for people, because just as we've asked, what takes somebody like that doesn't grow up with maybe an inbuilt kind of inspiration from a family that's already global, right? And all of a sudden turns their life into, journeyman's kind of story. And then the other thing is, of course, then talking to clients and saying, you're about to take your children on this adventure, but also be careful what you build, because their expectations of what now is like a simple vacation includes automatically the word, what country are we going to, right? So that's an interesting way. So there's two ways to this life. I think that's the message. There's a number of ways into the entry into this life. So yeah. And what about your children, Sundae? So are you bringing them up with that kind of same sense of independence and don't let the door hit you when you get old enough and go on?
Well, I think the jury's out right now about how close they want to stay to the nest or not. But I made a decision a long time ago. My children are already cross-cultural kids. because I was born and raised in the US. Their father was born and raised in Switzerland. And I knew what we already had work to do around the cross-cultural, bilingual, binational family side. And when we decided to move to West Africa and say they're going to be now third culture kids, I felt a lot of responsibility to support them with that. So and as an interculturalist, that's obviously my job. So I've spent a lot of time talking to my kids about what does home mean? Where is home? Is it inside? Is it external? What is stability? Is it inside or outside? And looking at, what do they want to build in their future? And one of my kids, I can imagine being a globetrotter, and the other one, I can imagine like setting up a farm in North Dakota. We'll see what they end up doing. But I'll let them decide, right? Like I remember one time my son had a school report, and in there they ask about, where's your hometown? And you had to do like a map of it. And he was born in Bern, Switzerland. But in the school report, the official report, it said Williston, North Dakota. And he had a geographical map. And I thought, okay, I'm going to just let him do that. That's where home is for him when he goes there to visit my parents in summer. Mm-hmm. And my other son, when you ask where he's from, he says Ouagadougou, because he was one when we went to West Africa. And for a long time, that was his answer, because that was his only home that he knew until we moved here.
Wow. That's fascinating. The story with my daughters is a bit different, but they too would have a hard time answering that. One of our daughters was born in Germany, where I was born and raised. Our second daughter was born in the United States, and we moved within the US. So home for them is also not necessarily an external place. They have a different definition.
Totally.
I'm curious. So the first time you left your bubble, let's say, or your native culture, was when you went across the state line and went to the Twin Cities. That probably wasn't the biggest of the shocks, I would suspect. I mean, you went from a fairly rural area to a more urban setting. But you mentioned that you went to study in Spain. Was that the first time you were outside of the US for a longer period of time?
For a longer period of time. Yeah. I think we'd spent some time in Canada. I spent a semester in Spain. And that was Well,
what did you learn there? What was the first thing that really hit you hard?
Mm-hmm. Well, I was, enthralled with the architecture and the age of the buildings and the history and the language and all of those things was, that young girl who was 8 years old wanting to be somewhere else was suddenly living in a monastery that was turned into a school center, right? And I was learning Spanish and traveling, and it was like I was hungry for something else, and I was being fed it. And how do people speak differently, relate differently, eat differently, think differently? I was so hungry to learn more. And that was just the beginning of it.
Now, would it be fair to say that the hunger and the curiosity was triggered because you were still in a quote unquote Western context? Yes, they spoke a different language. Yes, the architecture is different. Yes, the skin complexion may be a tad bit darker than it is in North Dakota. But yet we're still Europe, North America. There might be still some shared values, and the gap may not be as strong. But then Vietnam, how is that?
Yeah, I thought it was amazing. I mean, before Vietnam, I went to we went to Tangier, and I remember being there and walking with some friends, and they went to the man and said, "Why do you let the women lead you?" Because I was the one helping find the place. And so there was bigger cultural confrontations that happened before that. But in Vietnam, I felt so grateful to be able to be there and to absorb what was going on. It's a very surface level experience. I mean, now 20 years later, now that I've studied culture and how people adapt and what drives them initially, I see the polarization of, my culture and their culture, and the simplicity that I looked at everything, right? I flattened everything to nation. I went at the surface, right? So although it might seem adventurous, it was still very safe because I was able to stay in spaces that were within my comfort zone, right? And fair enough, when you're 20 and you're by yourself in a brand new context, it's a good way to enter, right? But it really, with hindsight, I look at how it helped me confront my identity, how I see nation, how do I see democracy? What do I think about communism? What do I think about Buddhism? Like, it helped me, meeting people and engaging with them and sharing food with them and smiling and laughing with them helped me go, wow, all these things I learned growing up aren't quite like I was told, right? There was so many more layers started to emerge and other sides of the story, like when you go to the Ho Chi Minh tunnels. And so all of that started to unravel. And I felt like I was discovering a new narratives that I didn't even know existed. And so that was really fascinating. It's also, just on another side, it was also really interesting to be a woman in Southeast Asia, coming from living in a city. So I lived in Minneapolis. And when I would walk to my home from my bus stop at night, I would do what many women do: hold your keys, clutch them, look behind you, very protective, just heart beating fast, and you get to your house, right? But when I got to Southeast Asia, I am this towering blonde woman. And the energy in the street was very different. I didn't feel threatened by men. It was a totally different way to be in a city. And that was a really interesting dynamic that I hadn't thought about until I was actually living it.
You also, of course, you mentioned going to college, and so while you were, and let's talk about the perceptions of the expat life, while you were quaffing cocktails in country clubs and tennis and tennis tournaments, because you don't do it, what expat spouses do. You didn't do that. You actually went to work learning, right? Putting some real academic context behind this, which is fascinating from somebody who didn't start out that way. I think it's wonderful. And so were you building, do you think, what came first? When you went to the college, were you looking for education around that to prepare yourself for this life? Or do you think you started your education and then went off to start this life and then tried to work out your experience through the education? What kind of, it's a bit of a chicken and egg question, I guess.
Well, my bachelor's degree was in communication, human communication, and Spanish. So there was an element of wanting to travel and wanting to engage with other cultures just from my bachelor's degree. But after that, that's when I went and I ended up meeting this Swiss guy in Vietnam, moved to Switzerland, and I had 4 really raw years of learning. I mean, Spanish was not useful for me in the city of Bern anymore. And I gave up everything I had created academically and also job-wise, my community, and had this really raw experience in Bern. And that inspired me to get my master's degree in intercultural communication and train for international transitions, because this was back in 1999, 2000, before Facebook groups, before the podcasts, all of that. I didn't have any models to draw from, also based on my background. So that raw experience inspired me to understand, also in a binational relationship, bicultural, bilingual, how do we do this? Like, how can we do this? And at first I was like, this is great. Edward T. Hall has the answer.
Yeah.
Right? I'm like, it's perfect. There's just the French and there's the Germans. And I was like, yay, I have security. And then I went and got my master's and it was like, flatch, oh no, it's not that simple. Culture is about history, power, identity, context, all these layers. And all of a sudden I thought, oh, it's not that simple.
Yeah.
And, but it helped me really make sense of my experience. And then I didn't even call myself an expat. In Switzerland, you're not an expat, you're an Ausländer. You are kind of an outsider, out of the land, right? So I didn't identify as an expat, even though technically I was outside of my country. And so when I got my degree in intercultural communication, I was able to learn how do I guide people through these transitions. Then I felt like I had the tools I wish I had when I started. But where I was doing that in corporate when I got to Switzerland, and from like 2008 to 2013. But what I didn't know, this is what most people don't know, is I was actually doing intercultural competence development on corporate level in Europe. And what would happen is I would get people who were on secondment, and they would say, Sundae, instead of talking about leadership or teams or cultural dimensions, can we talk about like how I can make friends here? Or can we talk about how I miss home? Or can we talk about how I feel really disconnected from my partner because they're working and I'm not? Or how do I have a purpose outside of work? And that is where the expat thing started coming in from my clients on secondment. And I'm like, oh, I understand you, because that's how I felt when I moved here. And then we became rotational expats. And that's when I started my company. And I realized from a business perspective, it's not where it's at with the intercultural competence. It's at this human experience of recreating yourself constantly, trying to find purpose and meaning, trying not to mess up when you're working across cultures, or trying not to lose your relationships when you're constantly moving. And that's where that all kind of took off. And then I was going to say, and then academically, because I've done some publications since then, we also realized what we were reading in the literature doesn't match people's lived experiences, right? When you talk about intercultural competence development, right? It's supposed to be this rainbow where we start here and then we grow here, but it's not. This is where the pendulum comes up. We actually swing on this pendulum like crazy. Right? So, Christian, you have really high intercultural competencies, but do you when you're in traffic and it's hot and you're in a bad mood? Right?
I will go back to the red zone of said rainbow, and I will shout all the expletives in my vernacular, and I will make gestures that probably should not be recorded, and then steam comes out of my ears, right? Yes.
Right? Or, you work really well with a team until you feel like you've been betrayed, and then all of a sudden you revert. Like, this is what we're noticing, is that the models that we've had didn't reflect the lived experiences. And that's where the pendulum comes in. Our competencies, it's the whole old thing of global versus local. It's, also, where's our health and well-being? What's going on? Bigger picture. What stress are we on? And that is why I'm constantly interested in this topic, because it's not as simple at first sight. Like my naivete with Edward T. Hall, I was like, yay, it's really simple. But it's not.
Yeah, I had that same experience when I first came across Höferle, and now we're bashing the godfathers and mothers of our field, which is not the case. Actually, we simply recognize the shoulders of those giants upon which we stand, and I think they would acknowledge us and egg us on to continue a path to deeper insights. So we can still recognize those who did the work before us, and be proud of whatever we find out in addition to that, to add on to the picture, to give it more texture. And the simplicity that I found in the early days of my studies, that quickly was overtaken by what you just said, my real life experience. And I thought, well, is it really? And then I do a lot of training work with bicultural or binational dynamics, and it's training participants easily come up, well, even in the briefing process, they come up with, well, the nation ones and the nation twos, and how do we get together? And taking them down from that expectation. There is no the nation one and the nation two. There's people, and let's look at how they show up and how their nationality may have influenced who they are today, and how it may have not. And this reducing people's behavior to the flag, to the colors of the flag, or the word on the passport, is a bit oversimplistic, right? but that's part of the work we do, right? I'm happy to see that clients come and say, well, we recognize that between nation A and nation 2 there is this. Great, so they've done a little bit of the work already. So now our job is to, well, bring the color to that sketch and maybe move the lines a little bit.
Absolutely. And I want to reiterate the idea of standing on the shoulders of giants, that that constant building process. And one of the things that I always say is I hope that when I'm a great grandmother or of that age, that I look back on my earlier work and feel sheepish about how naive I was. I constantly want to look back and have a little bit of change shame where you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I used to think that. But be able to see that as a place of celebration. Right. And because then it means we're growing. It means we're extending how we see things. And no scholar would say the learning has to stop, right? And I'm grateful that we have a context where we're invited to push those edges.
Right.
Yeah, the humility is a big part of it. If you don't have it, you're going to be shown it. When you're learning your chops and navigating the world in a foreign context, and that can often be either confronting or enriching or powerful and empowering, right? So we work with many of those people from different parts of that spectrum for sure. I love the pendulum, and I read that on your website, and I thought, well, that's I was being facetious when I opened it up with metaphors. We throw a lot of them around, but they are a real key. And
he does. I'm very literal.
Yeah, because my vernacular is pretty narrow, and I've got to just make stuff up. And no, but it is. I think it was a great one. But you said you actually, like on your website, it says you help people push the pendulum. So it's not about kind of just responding to the swings of the pendulum. It's about pushing it in an intentional direction. So what would be some of the tips that you offer your clients in terms of what it looks like when the pendulum seems to be a long way from them, or just put some context on that, because I think it was a fun way to look at it.
Well, so this, what you've heard on my website is a metaphor, but there's actual research that I'm doing together with Purdue University that supports this. So there's two things going on at one time, but let's look at it from a very basic perspective. If someone is in a space where they are feeling overwhelmed from where they are, how different everything is, how their values are different, they talk differently, the weather is different, et cetera, we're really focusing on difference, right? That's that polarization of where they are and where I am. In that situation, if you want to push the pendulum, you're like, okay, if that is true, and where do you have something in common, right? How can you work to try to find similarities? And that's also trying to give yourself an island of peace so you don't feel completely out of your comfort zone. So that's one pragmatic way, if we're looking at the lens of how people are adapting to a context. Another one could be where people are in accepting of differences, like, well, they have different, religion than I do, right? And that's okay, even though mine is probably better than theirs, right? There's like that hierarchy happening. More like, well, wait a minute, what can I appreciate about their path, and how can I even maybe participate if they're inviting me to learn more and adapt more? So that's where we're moving the pendulum. Or maybe it's even someone who's like God native and like pretend, they're basically being like someone who's very, very different from their way of growing up and are exhausting themselves, right? So how do we swing that pendulum back to, whoa, maybe we need to integrate some of the things of the way you grew up and how you know how to be in the world so that you feel like you haven't lost your identity, right? So those are some of the things that we do. Another, just outside of the intercultural competence development side, would be just in your own energy. I know a lot of people who are abroad feel like they gave up everything, like especially the accompanying partner. They gave up. They were a pharmacist, they were a lawyer, they were, a teacher, and they gave that up, moved abroad so that their partner could have a job and their kids could have a new experience. But what they do is they end up 4 years down the road or 8 years down the road going, hey, what about me? Now what do I do?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And moving the pendulum in that sense is more helping them allow themselves to find a purpose for them that's outside of their family or the organizational needs, and then take steps to create that.
Yep.
Okay.
And then it's dead silence. Did I say something?
No. Well, we've got to be comfortable with, there's a lot of cultures that are comfortable with silence. I think these are profound things. And, we can, where we try, well, obviously, yes, I'm being facetious. We don't want empty space on the world's number one global live show. That's important. But I think it's profound to let those things sink in a little bit, right? Because a sense of identity for the accompanying spouse, who goes off and does that and finds themselves, they come home and he or she is basically out of the loop in a lot of different ways. Can maybe even feel out of the loop internally in their own family, right? That's the difficult part. It's a very strong dynamic. So, yeah.
I'm extremely curious about your life in Africa, because we have, and when I say we, I mean the majority white Western world has, I think, a very lopsided view of what the continent is like today and what the future prospects are for the youngest continent in the world. So you live both in West Africa and now on the southern tip, and you are by ethnicity a member of the minority. However, now you live in South Africa, where being the white minority may come with a bit of a stigma. Whether you are Boerish or not doesn't matter, but you may be perceived as such just by people looking at you. What, in simple terms, for those who are not overly familiar with the dynamics in today's African nations, what's it like to be a Westerner on a continent in two different, very distinctly different countries that you lived in, on a continent that is now slowly but surely becoming aware of its potential?
Well, I don't know who gets to decide when awareness of potential was decided. I don't know if Africa ever didn't know what their potential was and hasn't always been living it.
Sure.
But so in my experience in Burkina Faso I was overwhelmed by the Burkinabe. They're called the land of the upright people, and that is exactly how I experienced them. It's a very hierarchy-oriented culture that you could imagine, and the deference that and the respect that I was offered was humbling, and I tried really hard to reciprocate that. It was the first time my children and I had lived in a space where we were the ethnic minority, and my children were like, okay, this is different than it was in Switzerland. What's happening here? And they were trying to make sense. Like, it was really sweet to watch through my kids' eyes. And I was proud of one thing that happened. We were waiting at an ATM and we were in line, and it's kind of a crowded city. And my son goes, he was 5 at the time. He goes, "Mom, we're the only light-skinned people." And I love that he said that and not white, because he hadn't yet internalized the identity of whiteness. And he was just making a simple observation. So my experience there was absolute of respect. And I can't speak for the Burkinabe. I don't know what they were thinking, but my experience was collaborators. What I witnessed at the Burkinabe, even Muslims and Christians would come together and support each other. Excuse me. When there was 2 Christian doctors that were kidnapped on the border, the Muslim community went out and protested and demanded that they be returned. Right? It's this beautiful sense of collective community. And there were times where I would experience something that beautiful, and then I would go back to Switzerland and I would be in the train station or the airport, and people would be like elbowing you out of the way. And I'm like, how do you define a developing country or a developed country? Like, there were times where it just frustrated me when I saw the generosity that people engaged each other within. So that was my experience in West Africa. In South Africa, it's been interesting for me. What I didn't expect is if I would go to a shop and a shopkeeper and I would engage, and they would be, in the way they talk about it here, they call them Black South Africans, right? There's the naming is, and so if a Black South African was there and I was there, there was an energy. And once I started to speak, they would kind of soften and be sweet and ask questions. And I think it was because they weren't expecting an American accent. And when they heard an American accent, that they warmed up to me quickly. And I thought that was really interesting to experience it that way. And so it's been interesting to be here in that context. My children have been, at the time, West Africa was the third poorest country on the planet, and to watch my children process that, and then to be in South Africa and have them understand about like estates and systems and guards and what's the security context, that's been really interesting. What I struggle with is I wish that there was more. I wish that the security issue wasn't such an issue, because I think it really keeps people from each other.
Yeah.
Right. But I don't know.
I have a friend, a German friend who was once married to her husband who's originally from Nigeria, and they spent, I think, 2 or 3 years in Durban. And she called me from Durban in tears, saying the inequality is driving her up the wall. The fact that she has everything, and every day she sees people who have nothing is driving her out of her mind, and there's nothing she can do about it. Is that something that hits you hard as well, or has that changed a little bit?
Yeah, that's definitely something we've seen pretty up close. And we've had to make some decisions on what do we do with that, right? And so our choices that we've made is we'll invest with the people that are closest to us. And for example, in Burkina Faso, we would invest in education. If we had someone who supported us in the home, we would make sure that they learn new skills, or that they had something more by the time that they were done working with us that they wouldn't have had access to. So those are, they say you should support an organization, not individuals, but actually we took the opposite approach in West Africa. We would support individuals that we were in relationship with. And of course we support organizations too. So that's kind of what we've done. I honestly, here's the argument that I have. And this is one of the reasons why I said yes to us having third culture kids and not just cross-culture kids is people tell me, Sundae, I couldn't live in places that you've lived because it would be too hard to see what's going on. And I say, it's going on anyway.
Right.
So you either look away or you see it, and you have to integrate that in your body and decide what you do with that, or you ignore it. But it is not happening. Right. So it has impacted how we see food, how we see resources, who we support, right? Because it's embodied. And these are not pictures on an envelope that you get in the post, right? We know what happens in Europe with all these things. These are people that we care about, that we've had relationships with. We know stories, we've met their children, right? And that makes a really big difference.
Now you're barking up the right tree, Sundae, because this is something that I am very passionate about. Then I get in my emotions easily about this. I think not having to face an unpleasant reality is the epitome of privilege. And that is something that I struggle with in so-called developed countries. I live in the US, and I love this country. That's why I live here. And yet I struggle with the inability of a lot of people to look the demons, their own demons, stare them down, stare them into the eyes and say, yep, I see you, and I confront you. And I don't think that is happening enough. And as long as we have an option to look the other way, then that which we don't like to see will persist.
Yeah.
And
hey, and I am inside this box. I'm not pointing fingers outside of this box, right? When I look at what's going on inside of the US with finally more attention is happening with Black Lives Matter, right? When I look at, and now this is also academically, I've studied about power and context and identity, and I look at my own journey. In 2016, when Black Lives Mattered, I thought that was cool. And then I just conveniently went on to who knows what, right? Like that is privilege, and it's because I can. And so I'm not saying I'm outside of this. This is and what I've done since, there's a lot of things that have happened which have helped me really choose to not look away. And from the anti-racism training that I've been doing in the last year, what I've learned is it's not here. I know enough, right? But it's like, how do you embody that? And when I was starting this journey to go a little bit more serious down the road, one of the educators, she said, you've got to know about it in your head. Like you need to know what's going on from an inequity perspective. You need to feel it, and then you need to do something. So head, heart, and hands. And I'm like, oh my God, knowing I got a lot of academic stuff, I'm not doing enough, but feeling I feel. And I was like, actually not. Like when Ahmaud Arbery was shot, that was terrible and it impacted me, but I could actually go back to work an hour later. But I have friends who were destroyed for the rest of the day because now they're afraid that their son could be the next one. Right. So no, it wasn't integrated in my body because I haven't had that lived experience. Right. And so that is the thing about, I think, embodying that. It's not knowing, it's physically in your body. And I wish it could go faster. And I catch myself wanting to be further on my journey. And I know that this is not a process that you can rush, but you also can't look away from it. Right. So I don't know. I mean, it's just something I just want to make sure that I don't want to give anybody the idea that I feel like I'm in a different place than everybody else. I am also just trying to learn. I have so much growth to do, right? Because my lived experience is as a straight, white, heterosexual woman from a passport privileged country. Right. So I have to undo all of that.
So you haven't won the Vogue Olympics yet, so none of us are.
Next year, I'm going to compete next year.
All right.
No, but I mean, it's so humbling. And, but I'm just so sick of myself. Like I'm so sick of not doing the work deeply. Right. And I have that choice. That's the privilege in it, right? We have that choice.
Yeah. Can
we switch gears to your podcast real quick? I want to hear about it while I bring up an image.
Sure.
Tell about it.
So the podcast started as I'm in my 5th season. I started Expat Happy Hour so that I can deliver straight talk about expat life. And like we just talked about, I don't want to hide that. That's part of it, right? About people feeling lonely, don't want to hide that. About women feeling like their self-worth has been hit, don't want to hide that. So I committed to doing Expat Happy Hour to reach a wider audience around the straight talk of expat life. I also, in my work as a coach, there's all kinds of strategies that are creating great success for my clients. I want to share that so other people have those tools in their hands. But it's also called Expat Happy Hour because we have a lot of fun. We laugh a lot. We try to take the hard things and keep an attitude of playfulness so that we can run the long haul on whatever that is that you're feeling challenged by. So that's why I started it.
Do you do it by yourself? Is that you talking, or do you have a co-host, or do you work it with guests? And how do people find it? Too many questions in one, but you decide which one you want to answer first.
Okay, so I often have solo shows, but I love having guests based on whatever theme that I feel like is under highlighted at the moment or is burning for us to talk about. You have so many questions. Where do I find it? It's on Expat Happy Hour. You can find it on sundaebean.com/expat happy hour or any podcast channel. I'm pretty much out there. So no, it's been, I have to be honest, it's also been a huge personal journey for me. Because I come from a corporate background and it felt very safe to be in the professional space. It has been a vulnerable experience to drop my guard and share my personal stories and share what's hard, because I also want people to know this isn't just on a professional level. Absolutely. I get it, but I also live this life. So I understand that there's gorgeous things about it and there's also hard things about it. So it's important to me to also share some of that journey. I like to share my scars, not my wounds. So after I've processed some of those things and have some lessons from it, then I'll bring those also onto the show.
Yeah, that is a lesson that I learned from one of my mentors years ago. Is you don't teach about the wound that is still bleeding, unless it's scabbed or healed. You're just gonna gush more pain onto people. So I like the way you phrase that. Scars, not wounds. Nice.
Yeah, and I mean, people also they come to me for support, right? So if I'm sharing wounds, then how can I be in a space to support them, right? So I try to do my own work so that I can really be strong for them.
Yeah. All right, people. Hang on. Let me bring up this thing again. I hope I can. Oh man, I thought I could. We had the image up. Let's bring up another image. Let's overlay it so this will cover our faces. Here, Expat Happy Hour. That's how you find it. SundaeBean.com is the website. So your husband is the Schneider, and he has no real estate. That's awesome.
Well, my official business name is Sundae Schneider-Bean, but it's too complicated on a website.
That's also your handle on the socials, right? Sundae Bean.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Excellent.
That's right. That's good.
This was lovely. This was lovely.
Thank you. It's been so fun. I haven't been able to see the chat, so I'll check in the chat if anybody has any questions after we're done with the show.
Usually we have people asking questions after we're done with it, so they might come up later. So whatever it is, folks, wherever you are in the world, bring it. Post your questions or comments or your own blurbs about your experiences of a global life and how the pendulum is swinging for you, or how you would like your pendulum to be what's that, anchored, yes, or given an impulse so it can swing, maybe. Right.
True.
Excellent. Thank you for joining us today. This for us was an unusual hour. I don't ever think we did a show this time of day. Have we done that, Brett? Oh, just for you.
I don't know. What do you mean? What kind of day? It's at the same time zone everywhere. We just do it whenever we need to do it. It's like it's wonderful. I've got the family up there doing breakfast, and what they're looking now. What are you doing at this time in the morning? We are serving our clients. We're serving our audience, that global village of audience, as Sundae does as well too. So, thank you so much, Sundae. This has been wonderful. I know it took a little while for us to get it together, but it was well worth it, and we should do it, of course, again and stay in touch.
Yeah.
May I ask one more question? Just a quick one. So, do you and your family, Sundae, do you observe a spiritual practice?
Not formally. We're going to celebrate Easter weekend in the very sort of Easter egg sort of.
That's where my question was headed towards. Yep. So is it Passover? Is it Easter? Or is Ramadan coming up? So which one of the Abrahamic one is it? And
we're going to be we're going to be finding Easter eggs and gummy carrots and all kinds of things around the house this weekend.
So you managed to maintain that type of ritual for your children and the entire family, no matter where in the world you are.
Yep, we do. I mean, most of the things we try to sort of marry the important things to me, like Halloween, and you know, the 1st of August for my husband. Like, we try to marry the Swiss and American holidays that we think are important. But we try to do it in a way that makes sense for us instead of maybe a commercialized version of it. And some of those anchor points are like 4th of July or the 1st of August. So we definitely try to do that.
Which is the Swiss national holiday, right?
Swiss national day. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
And if you're asking yourself while you're watching this, why this was so funny today, because look at the calendar. This show is no joke, but we still made you laugh, right? So there you go.
There you go. Very nice.
See, who says a German can't do that?
Takes his humor very seriously. This is very fun, right?
It's so fun.
Sundae, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Appreciate it.
Two Chaps, Many Cultures, your show about the business of culture and how culture impacts everything we do in business and outside. Thursday's episode. We'll see you again tomorrow. Thank you, Sundae Bean. Thank you, Brett. We're out for now. See you tomorrow.
See you guys. Bye.